Have you ever walked past someone without really seeing them? Maybe they were sitting quietly on a park bench. Maybe they were standing in line at a grocery store with tired eyes and worn-out clothes. Maybe they smiled at you, but you looked away because life felt too busy. Most people never realize that a single moment of kindness can completely change another person's life. But one cold winter evening in a small American town, a simple act of compassion started a chain reaction nobody could have imagined. A lonely waitress, a homeless stranger, a grieving father, and a forgotten little girl would all become connected by one decision that seemed small at first, but ended up transforming an entire community forever. Before we begin this emotional story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that kindness still exists in the world, and every single one of you helps keep that hope alive. Now let's begin. The town of Maplewood looked beautiful after fresh snow covered the streets. Christmas lights glowed from shop windows, and soft music drifted through downtown sidewalks. From the outside, everything looked warm and peaceful. But not everyone in Maplewood felt the joy of the season. 32-year-old Emily Carter stood behind the counter of Rosie's Diner wearing a tired smile. Her feet hurt after another 12-hour shift, and dark circles rested beneath her eyes. She poured coffee for customers while pretending everything in her life was okay. It wasn't. 3 years earlier, Emily had lost her husband Daniel in a car accident during a snowstorm just outside town. One moment he had called her to say he was driving home. 20 minutes later, police officers knocked on her door. Since then, life had felt heavy. Emily worked non-stop just to pay rent for the small apartment she shared with her 8-year-old daughter Lily. Every dollar mattered. Every extra tip mattered. Every late-night shift mattered. Still, despite her exhaustion, Emily tried to stay kind. Customers often said Rosie's Diner felt warmer whenever she was working. She remembered regulars' names. She listened when elderly customers needed someone to talk to. She slipped free pie slices to lonely truck drivers during holidays. Most people never noticed how much pain she carried inside. That Friday night was especially cold. Snow blew against the diner windows while customers hurried inside to escape the freezing wind. Emily balanced plates of burgers and soup while Christmas songs played quietly overhead. Around 9 o'clock, the diner door slowly opened. A man stepped inside wearing an old brown coat covered with snow. His beard looked untrimmed, and his hands shook from the cold. He looked around carefully, almost nervously. Conversations inside the diner became quieter. A few customers immediately looked uncomfortable. The man walked toward an empty booth near the back. Rosie, the diner owner, leaned toward Emily and whispered softly, "We've had trouble lately with people coming in and not paying." Emily glanced at the stranger. He looked exhausted more than dangerous. "I'll handle it," Emily said gently. She grabbed a menu and approached the booth. "Evening," she said warmly. The man looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I don't actually have money for food. I just wanted to warm up for a few minutes. I can leave if you want." Emily noticed how carefully he avoided eye contact. Like someone used to rejection. Like someone who expected people to treat him badly. Something inside her heart hurt. "When's the last time you ate?" she asked. The man hesitated. "Yesterday morning." Emily looked toward the kitchen. Then back at the man. "Stay seated," she said. A few minutes later, she returned carrying hot chicken soup, bread, mashed potatoes, and coffee. The man stared at the food in shock. "I can't pay for this," he said. "You don't need to," Emily replied. Tears slowly filled the man's eyes. Nobody in the diner said anything for a moment. The stranger lowered his head and whispered, "Thank you." Emily smiled gently. "You're welcome." The man ate slowly at first, almost like he didn't trust the meal was really his. Then hunger took over. He finished every bite. As Emily cleaned nearby tables, she noticed customers watching quietly. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked emotional. One elderly woman near the front counter wiped tears from her eyes. After finishing his meal, the stranger carefully folded his napkin and stood. "What's your name?" Emily asked. "Thomas," he answered. "Well, Thomas," Emily said softly, "you stay warm tonight." Before leaving, Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny silver object. A small angel pin. "It belonged to my daughter," he said quietly. "I want you to have it." Emily immediately shook her head. "No, I can't take that." "Please," Thomas insisted. "Kindness should be passed forward." Emily slowly accepted the pin. Thomas gave her one final grateful smile before stepping back into the snow. Emily watched him disappear into the dark street. She had no idea that moment would change her life forever. The next morning, Emily pinned the small silver angel onto her work apron. Lily noticed it immediately before school. "Mom, where did you get that?" Emily smiled while pouring cereal. "A man gave it to me last night." "Why?" Lily asked. "Because sometimes people just need someone to care." Lily thought quietly for a moment. Then she nodded. Children understood kindness better than adults sometimes. Later that afternoon, Emily received unexpected news. The apartment building owner planned to raise rent starting January. Emily's stomach dropped. She already struggled to afford groceries and utilities. After hanging up the phone, she sat silently at her kitchen table fighting tears. Lily walked over and wrapped small arms around her mother. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. Emily hugged her tightly. But inside, fear kept growing. That evening at the diner, customers filled nearly every booth. Emily rushed between tables carrying trays while Rosie shouted food orders toward the kitchen. Then the front door opened again. Emily looked up. It was Thomas. But this time, he wasn't alone. A young police officer stood beside him. Several customers immediately stared. Thomas looked nervous. The officer approached the counter. "Are you Emily Carter?" he asked. Emily nodded carefully. "Yes." The officer smiled. "Sir, is everything okay?" Rosie asked from behind the register. The officer looked toward Emily. "This gentleman wanted help finding you." Thomas stepped forward holding a folded newspaper. "I found something today," he said. He opened the paper carefully. Inside was a photograph. Emily froze. It was Daniel. Her late husband. The article described how Daniel had stopped during a snowstorm years earlier to help a stranded driver. That driver had survived because of Daniel. Emily's hands began shaking. "I don't understand," she whispered. Thomas swallowed hard. "That driver was me." Silence filled the diner. Emily stared at him in disbelief. Thomas continued softly. 3 years ago my car slid off Highway 14 during a blizzard. I was trapped inside freezing. Your husband stopped and pulled me out before emergency crews arrived." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He never told me," she whispered. Thomas nodded sadly. "I found out later he died that same night after leaving the scene." Emily covered her mouth. For years she had carried anger toward fate. Toward the storm. Toward the unfairness of losing Daniel. Now she learned his final act had been saving someone else's life. Thomas looked down in shame. "I spent years trying to find you," he admitted. "But after my wife and daughter died from illness, I lost everything. I lost my home. My job. Myself." The entire diner listened quietly. "And last night," Thomas said emotionally, "without knowing who I was, you showed me the same kindness your husband once showed me." Emily couldn't stop crying. Neither could several customers. Thomas reached into his pocket and handed Emily another folded paper. "This is a letter I wrote years ago. I never knew where to send it." With trembling hands, Emily opened the letter. Inside, Thomas described how Daniel had stayed beside him during the storm, wrapped him in his own coat, and kept talking to him until help arrived. He kept saying, "Nobody deserves to die alone," Emily read aloud softly. Her voice broke. That sounded exactly like Daniel. The kindest person she had ever known. For the first time since losing her husband, Emily felt something unexpected. Pride. Daniel's kindness had survived even after his death. And somehow, through one simple meal at a diner, that kindness had found its way back to her. Word about the story spread through Maplewood quickly. Customers told neighbors. Neighbors told co-workers. Soon nearly everyone in town knew about the waitress who fed a homeless stranger, only to discover her late husband had once saved his life. The story touched people deeply. Especially during Christmas season. A few days later, Emily arrived at work and froze in surprise. Outside Rosie's diner stood dozens of people. Boxes covered the sidewalk. Rosie hurried outside smiling. "Emily," she laughed through tears, "these are for you." Inside the boxes were groceries, winter coats, toys for Lily, gift cards, and envelopes filled with money. One envelope simply read, "For kindness." Emily cried openly. She had spent years feeling invisible. Now an entire town was showing her compassion. But the biggest surprise came later that evening. A local contractor named Marcus Hill entered the diner carrying paperwork. "I heard about your rent situation," he said. Emily looked confused. Marcus smiled. "My company owns a small house near Oak Street. It's been empty for months. If you want it, you and Lily can live there rent-free for a year." Emily stared speechless. "What?" Marcus shrugged. "Years ago my mother struggled raising me alone after my father died. People helped us survive. I never forgot it." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Why would you do this for someone you barely know?" Marcus looked around the diner. "Because kindness spreads." That sentence stayed with Emily for a long time. Kindness spreads. A week later, Emily and Lily moved into the little Oak Street house. It wasn't fancy. But it felt warm. Safe. For the first time in years, Emily slept peacefully. Lily decorated her bedroom with paper snowflakes while Christmas music played softly through the house. That night, Emily sat alone in the kitchen holding Daniel's photograph. "I think you'd love this place," she whispered. For the first time since his death, she smiled while thinking about him. Not because the pain disappeared, but because love had finally become stronger than grief. Meanwhile, Thomas slowly began rebuilding his life too. Rosie offered him part-time work cleaning around the diner. At first, some customers remained cautious. But Thomas worked hard. He arrived early. Stayed late. Helped elderly customers carry groceries to their cars. Little by little, people started respecting him. One snowy afternoon, Lily walked into the diner after school and found Thomas fixing a broken chair. "Hi, Mr. Thomas," she said cheerfully. Thomas smiled warmly. "Hello, Miss Lily." She sat beside him quietly for a moment. Then she asked the question adults avoided. "Were you lonely when you lived outside?" Thomas stopped working. Very slowly, he nodded. "Very lonely." Lily thought carefully. "My dad used to say nobody should feel alone." Thomas looked emotional. "That sounds like your father." Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a hand-drawn picture. It showed 3 people standing beneath falling snow outside the diner. One person wore angel wings. "That's my dad watching over us," she explained. Thomas held the drawing gently. His eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. Children had a way of healing wounds adults carried for years. Over the following months, Maplewood changed. People who once ignored struggling neighbors started paying attention. The local grocery store began donating extra food to shelters. A barber downtown started offering free haircuts every Sunday for homeless people. Teachers at the elementary school organized winter coat drives. One act of kindness had inspired another. And another. And another. Emily noticed something beautiful happening. The town felt different. Warmer. More human. Then one night, another unexpected moment changed everything again. It happened during a heavy snowstorm in February. Roads became dangerous quickly. Ice covered highways, and visibility disappeared beneath thick blowing snow. Around midnight, Rosie's diner received a frantic phone call. A school bus carrying children home from a basketball game had slid off the road outside town. Emergency crews were delayed because weather conditions were so bad. Without hesitation, people across Maplewood sprang into action. Marcus brought construction trucks. Rosie prepared hot coffee and blankets. Thomas volunteered immediately. Emily joined too. Together, a group of townspeople drove carefully through the storm toward the stranded bus. When they arrived, frightened children sat shivering inside. Parents hadn't reached them yet. Snow piled around the tires. The driver looked terrified. Thomas immediately climbed through deep snow carrying blankets. "It's okay," he shouted above the wind. "We've got you." Emily helped children exit the bus safely while Marcus attached chains from his truck. The rescue lasted nearly 2 hours. But eventually every child made it home safely. Later, local news stations covered the story. Reporters called Maplewood the town where strangers still help strangers. Emily watched the news from her living room beside Lily. Thomas appeared briefly on television handing a little boy his winter coat. Lily smiled proudly. "Mom," she whispered, "Dad would really like Mr. Thomas." Emily squeezed her daughter's hand. "Yes," she said softly. "I think he would." Spring slowly arrived after the long winter. Snow melted from sidewalks. Flowers bloomed across Maplewood. And for the first time in years, Emily started dreaming about the future again. Not just surviving. Living. One Sunday afternoon, Rosie surprised Emily with exciting news. "I'm retiring next year," Rosie announced. Emily nearly dropped a tray. "What?" Rosie laughed. "I'm getting old, sweetheart." "But what about the diner?" Emily asked. Rosie smiled warmly. "I want you to take over someday." Emily stared in disbelief. "I can't afford that." Rosie leaned forward. "You'd be surprised how many people want to help you." Within weeks, townspeople organized fundraising events to support Emily becoming the future owner of Rosie's Diner. A charity auction raised thousands. Local musicians performed free concerts. Children sold homemade cookies downtown. Emily felt overwhelmed. All because years earlier, Daniel had chosen kindness during a snowstorm. And because one night, she chose kindness toward a hungry stranger. Sometimes the smallest moments create the biggest changes. One evening near sunset, Emily found Thomas sitting quietly outside the diner. He looked thoughtful. "You okay?" she asked. Thomas nodded slowly. "I was just thinking about my daughter." Emily sat beside him. "What was she like?" Thomas smiled sadly. "She loved drawing pictures. She used to believe every person carried invisible pain." Emily listened quietly. "She'd tell me, 'Dad, be kind anyway. You never know what someone is surviving.'" Emily looked toward the sunset glowing across Maplewood. "That's true," she whispered. Thomas glanced at her. "Your husband knew that too?" Silence settled peacefully between them. Not awkward. Comfortable. Like two wounded people finally understanding each other. Months later, Maplewood held its annual summer festival. Families filled downtown streets with laughter and music. Children ran between carnival games while food trucks lined sidewalks. This year, however, the festival included something new. A large banner stretched across Main Street reading, "The Kindness Festival." Underneath, smaller words said, "Inspired by the people who remind us to care for one another." Emily felt emotional seeing it. So did Thomas. During the festival, people shared stories publicly about moments of kindness that changed their lives. An elderly veteran described how strangers helped repair his home after a storm. A single mother talked about teachers secretly buying school supplies for her children. A teenage boy admitted he almost gave up on life before neighbors supported him during depression. Again and again, people repeated the same truth. Small acts matter. Very often, they matter more than we realize. As evening arrived, the mayor stepped onto the festival stage. "We spend so much time focusing on bad news," she said. "But communities survive because ordinary people choose compassion every single day." Then she invited Emily and Thomas onto the stage. The crowd applauded loudly. Emily felt embarrassed. Thomas looked nervous. But the mayor smiled warmly. "Your story reminded this town who we are," she told them. Emily looked out across hundreds of faces glowing beneath festival lights. Some were crying. Others smiled. Many held candles. And suddenly Emily understood something deeply important. Pain isolates people. Kindness reconnects them. When the applause faded, Thomas quietly stepped toward the microphone. "I used to believe my life was over," he admitted honestly. "After losing my family, I stopped believing anyone cared whether I lived or died." The crowd listened silently. Then one night, someone offered me a bowl of soup. People laughed softly through tears. Thomas smiled. "It sounds simple. But sometimes kindness saves people in ways you can't see." Emily wiped tears from her face. Thomas continued. "And if you remember anything tonight, remember this: every person you meet is carrying something heavy. Be gentle with people. It matters." The crowd stood applauding. Not because Thomas was perfect. Not because Emily was perfect. But because everyone understood the truth behind those words. Life is hard. Kindness helps. After the festival ended, Emily walked home beneath warm summer stars with Lily holding her hand. "Mom?" Lily asked softly. "Yes. Do you think one person can really change the world?" Emily looked toward downtown Maplewood glowing peacefully behind them. She thought about Daniel, Thomas, Rosie, Marcus, the rescue during the snowstorm, the families helping one another. Then she smiled. "I think kindness changes the world one person at a time." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer. Years passed. Rosie officially retired, and Emily became owner of the diner. But she changed one thing immediately. Near the front entrance, she placed a small wooden sign. It read, "If you are hungry and cannot pay, you may still eat here." Below the sign hung a tiny silver angel pin. Thomas continued working at the diner too. Not because he had nowhere else to go anymore, but because Maplewood had become home. Sometimes travelers asked about the angel pin. Emily always smiled before telling the story. And every time she told it, people grew emotional. Because deep down, everyone hopes kindness still exists. One snowy December evening many years later, Emily noticed a teenage boy sitting alone outside the diner. He looked cold. Lost. Afraid. Without hesitation, she opened the door. "Come inside," she said gently. The boy hesitated. "I don't have money." Emily smiled warmly. "That's okay." As the boy stepped into the warmth of Rosie's diner, Thomas looked up from the counter. Their eyes met briefly. And both men smiled. Because they understood something powerful. Every act of kindness creates another opportunity for kindness. The cycle never truly ends. Late that night after closing the diner, Emily stood alone by the window watching snow fall softly across Maplewood. She thought about how different life looked compared to years earlier. Back then she believed grief would define the rest of her life. Now she understood something better. Pain may shape people. But kindness heals them. Not instantly. Not perfectly. But slowly. Patiently. One heart at a time. She touched the angel pin gently. Then whispered the same words Daniel once spoke during a storm. Nobody deserves to feel alone. Outside, snow continued falling quietly across the town. Inside the diner, warmth glowed through the windows. And somewhere nearby, another person was probably being helped by someone who chose compassion over indifference. That is how kindness survives. Not through grand speeches. Not through fame. But through ordinary people making small loving choices every day. Holding doors. Sharing meals. Listening carefully. Helping strangers. Forgiving mistakes. Offering hope. The world changes whenever someone decides another human being matters. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not that kindness exists. But that it continues spreading from person to person, generation after generation, even during life's darkest moments. So if you're watching this today feeling invisible, hurting, exhausted, or alone, remember this story. There are still good people in the world. And your kindness matters more than you know. A smile may save someone's day. A conversation may save someone's life. A simple meal may restore someone's faith in humanity. Never underestimate the power of compassion. Because one small act of kindness can travel farther than we ever imagine. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, share it with someone who may need hope today. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us about a moment when kindness changed your life. And wherever you are in the world tonight, remember this. Be kind anyway. Someone out there may be waiting for the very kindness only you can give.